Fire Pro Wrestling has an interesting and storied past, a past I eventually planned to cover in one video. It all started on the PC Engine back in 1989, and until the recent announcement of Fire Pro World, it seemed like it would all end with Fire Pro Returns, a name that didn't seem to fit the eventual outcome for the game. The reason this game is called Returns is because Fire Pro Wrestling Z, the game that came before this on the PS2 in 2003, only in Japan, was supposed to be the final game in the series. The cover even says Arigato Fire Pro, Sayonara Fire Pro, which means thank you Fire Pro, goodbye Fire Pro. Returns marked the return of the series and ended up being the last thing we got up until Fire Pro World. And no, there was never a Fire Pro avatar. It never happened. Okay, so it did happen, and it was such a huge departure from the Fire Pro series, it's not recognized by most fans. Fire Pro has had its spin-offs, but even those didn't depart as much as Fire Pro Wrestling for the Xbox 360. I'm also not really counting the few mobile games that Fire Pro had, they're just not something we need to cover right now. Fire Pro Wrestling was released for PS2 in 2005 in Japan, and by some miracle, got an English translation that was released by Agetec in 2007. There are several things, especially in the edit menus, that haven't been properly translated, leading to some yes means no and no means yes situations. To sum up Fire Pro before we get into detail, the series has always been about gameplay first. This means that some of the games lack in mode depth, though some have had the best story and management modes we've ever seen in wrestling games, but Fire Pro Wrestling Returns would certainly fall into the category of lacking in modes. You have your traditional exhibition, tournaments, leagues, and other modes you'd expect to see in a Japanese-based wrestling game. Returns also offers a Matchmaker mode, which honestly sounds a lot better than it actually is. In Matchmaker, you're tasked with being a promoter for 12 shows. However, you only have access to a limited amount of promotions and a limited amount of wrestlers. You can't even use any wrestlers that you've created, or as they're called in Fire Pro, edits. You're given a set amount of currency, and each wrestler has a different cost depending on their ranking and charisma. The style of matches and the wrestlers that you book will depend on the promotion you select. Some promotions have fans that want to see more comedy, or some want to see more death matches. As you get further and further into your 12-show career, more promotions and more wrestlers unlock. You can also unlock wrestlers by meeting certain conditions. From time to time, the game will tell you when a wrestler is extremely popular at the moment, and booking them in a prominent role in your show can give you a boost. All in all, Matchmaker mode is okay, as long as you're willing to take the ride. Most will see it as extremely limiting though. Where Fire Pro Returns shines is its edit options. Wrestlers, referees, rings, logos, belts, and teams are all up for customization. The wrestler customization may look limited at first, but fans have proven over the years that you can mix and match thousands and thousands of parts and colors to make virtually whoever you want. Because of the 2D graphics, it's easier to match the likeness of your favorite real-life wrestler, whereas with 3D wrestling games, it's much easier to screw up a real-life likeness because you have to account for much more detail. There's a massive move list to choose from, some that still haven't even made it to the WWE games 10 years later. I remember when this first came out, it was the first game to include moves like the Canadian Destroyer or the Flipping Piledriver. You can also adjust each wrestler's parameters, which are like attributes. But the biggest difference between Fire Pro and your typical wrestling game is that you can edit the logic of any wrestler. This allows you to essentially program their AI, allowing you to set the personality and sequences a wrestler exhibits during a match. What this means is that you can set someone to hit a move at roughly any point in the match and have them follow it up with a pin or submission. Not only that, but you can tune its frequency down to the percentage. It's an intricate system that, once mastered, is a highly rewarding tool to have at your disposal. Trying to come up with cool new combinations is a game in itself, and what's better is that you're given 500 save slots per save file to fill up with edits. That's 5 times what you see in a WWE game today. Creating a referee is a lot like creating an edit, only you're not worrying about movesets, parameters, and personal information. Referees do have their own logic, however, though it's much more limited than what you'd see in the wrestler edit menu. You can tune how quickly the referee moves, how quickly they count, and how lenient they are to things like DQs. Having a referee that counts slowly can extend the length of your matches, where one that counts quickly can be perfect for a cruiserweight fed. For rings, you can recolor the ropes, mats, aprons, change the style of the turnbuckles, and more. While this is pretty simplistic, it works really well. You can also add custom logos to the middle of the ring by making them in the logo editor tool. It would have been nice to have a few more options, like being able to place logos on the ring aprons and turnbuckle pads, but you have to remember that this was released originally in 2005. No other wrestling game was really doing this at the time. The logo editor is... well, it's something. You can definitely create some pretty great logos if you have the time and patience. You can create some pretty crappy logos fairly quickly, but if you want to get high quality results, you'll have to go line by line, pixel by pixel, which can take hours and hours. On top of that, the menu is an absolute mess. There are lots of different tools at your disposal, but navigating your way through them may result in accidentally erasing. I love that the logo editor is an option, I just wish it were better designed. Belt edit is a bit of a disappointment on two fronts. Firstly, you're limited in what you can create because all you can really do is recolor a set belt design. And while you can recolor all sorts of different areas of the belt and change things like side plates, it never really feels like you're creating your own belt. But perhaps the most disappointing thing is that you can never actually see the belt in gameplay. Wrestlers won't come out wearing the title, nor will the referee hold it up before a match. It's really just something to have in the menus, and that's it. As for teams, there's not really much to say about it. It's just putting together a faction. I never use it, and I've never found use for it. So far, Fire Pro sounds like a decent game. It's got some strengths and some weaknesses. So what keeps people coming back after all these years? It's the foundation of the gameplay engine. This engine was great back when it first hit in the late 80s, and it's great now. By staying true to its roots and staying 2D, while it might not be the best looking game, it delivers surprises even a decade after playing it. The way the wrestlers interact with each other, based off their styles, creates for different kinds of reversals, and every time I think I've seen them all, a new one pops up and makes me fall in love all over again. While the AI of the default wrestlers is questionable at best, once you start making your own rosters, you'll see some of the best matches you've seen in a wrestling video game, and some of the best matches you've seen in wrestling at all, to be honest. Because of the customizable logic, the gameplay really is the hero with this game. I plan to review every game in the series, and to be honest, a lot of them are pretty similar. Something that's going to set these games apart is the roster. Fire Pro, at least up until Fire Pro World, creates their rosters based on real-world wrestlers. They look like the wrestlers, they, for the most part, act like the wrestlers, but they don't have the actual wrestlers' names. I'd call them parodies for lack of a better term. Most of these rosters are the product of the year that they were released, but they also include some wrestling legends in most of their games. The roster in Returns is huge. There are over 300 wrestlers and fighters to use, from modern Japan to classic Japan, to a large selection of women and even MMA fighters. However, if you're not a fan of Japanese wrestling, you may find the roster a bit disappointing. There are guys like Bret Hart, British Bulldog, Bam Bam Bigelow, Jeff Jarrett, Sting, AJ Styles, etc. However, they are missing a lot of names from the WWE that you probably would have expected. Again, this game came out in 2005, which was a transition period for the WWE, but there's no Chris Jericho, Triple H, Shawn Michaels, or even older wrestlers like Hulk Hogan or Macho Man. However, the great thing about Fire Pro is, most of these guys can be made in edit mode, and actually even have preset heads in the options. But perhaps the strongest thing about Fire Pro is its community. Since 1993, this community has been importing the game, learning and teaching its mechanics, and making save packs for those who feel like playing a certain company or a certain era. They've been tremendously helpful to me learning this game inside and out, and now I love this game just as much as they do. Fire Pro Wrestling does have its share of flaws and questionable design choices, but I've never played a wrestling game that was better overall. Yes, there are other wrestling games that do things better than Fire Pro, but it's Returns that I continue to come back to, and with Fire Pro World on the way, there will be a whole new generation who will do exactly the same.